Test. All right. Just what we're doing. Cool. All right. I think I need a little bit more there going out. Audio is good. Last time. All right. Let's see how this goes. All right. Those. There we go. All right. Yeah, I may lose the recording going out. All right. So, we're logged in here, and does get signed in for me. Fantastic. At Core 2.1 today. And there's a number of things that we're going to focus on. We're going to look at HTTPS. We're going to look at identity as a library, and HTTP signal, and losing my headset. The mic is coming and going. We'll see. All right. I got to focus on the folks here in the room. There are folks online that I'm not going to be focused, but I want to make sure that they can see. First thing we're going to do, we're going to launch 17, and we're going to talk about new project and how to get in it and get started with this. So, and it's kind of cut off here, but I'm starting Visual Studio. It's off there on the side. And Visual Studio should be starting. Here we go. Right? I guess I didn't click it hard enough. Of course, it has all the different projects so you can get up and running. It'll give these folks something. All right. Seems the headset isn't working. All right. So, this is the list of all the things that are available for me to use as I work and build my application. Now, you start a new application by executing the .NET new command. When you execute that, you're going to get a list of different templates that are available to you here. It's kind of cut off in this view. But if I scroll up here, you can see I have console application, I've got a class library, a unit test project, Razor page projects, ASP.NET Core. These are the different templates that are actually the same templates that you have inside of Visual Studio. So you're able to run .NET New and get a project template coming out. You're also able to run .NET Build and build your application all from the command line if you don't have Visual Studio or you're on an operating system that doesn't have Visual Studio. So I want to make sure you know that that's available. That's not how we're going to focus on this part of the workshop. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go and we're going to start a new project according to the documentation here in the workshop. And we're going to create a new ASP.NET Core application. So I will say File, New, Project. And this will load up. And I'm in Visual C#. You can see it's right here, ASP.NET Core Web Application. It's also under Web, ASP.NET Core Web Application, and it's also under .NET Core, ASP.NET Core. So I'm going to call this Ignite 2018, and it'll start loading up all the templates that I have available to me, and you can see them here. Now notice the drop-down boxes up at the top. I can choose the ASP.NET Core version that I want to build with. So we want to make sure that we choose ASP.NET Core 2.1. That makes sure that our application is configured to use the latest version of ASP.NET Core for us and all the different features that come along with that. And we're going to choose the web application template. This template has Razor pages, our new user interface design technique that you'll be able to use for building out HTML pages. Now, going down the side here, we're also going to change authentication and we're going to turn on individual user accounts. So what this does is it'll put together a little SQL Server database that we can interact with and save user information to. All right. So I'm going to say OK and let that run and scroll up to the next element in the workshop while this is building out the project for us. And in just a second, here it comes. Now it's restored a bunch of NuGet packages, and NuGet packages are those that, right, it's a block of content that we use inside of a .NET Core and ASP.NET Core project. Now, we use NuGet packages instead of just DLLs because we also want to deliver DLLs that work great on other operating systems if we need them, or DLLs for other versions of the .NET's frameworks if we need those to be shipped as well. So I'm going to close this. We don't really need to look at that README page. And I want to make sure that I show you what's going on inside of our program class first. This is the file that starts and really bootstraps and launches an ASP.NET Core application. So let me go into the environment here. And I'm just going to pump up our font size so that everybody can see that a little bit. I think that's better. Real easy. This looks and feels like a console application, and that's because it really is. I've got a public static void main. That's the same method signature that I have for a console app, and it's going to create web host builder with some arguments, build it, and then run it. So our ASP.NET Core web server actually runs inside of a console application. It's not just IIS. This way, our application can run wherever and behind any other web server that we want to. We can do that same reverse proxy strategy that some of our friends in the Node community use when they run Express, right? They set up a reverse proxy from IIS or from Apache or Nginx. You can do the same thing here with our web server called Kestrel. I know, Kestrel, right? The marketing folks didn't change that and make it Microsoft ASP.NET Developer Web Server 2018 Fall Refresh 2. It's Kestrel. So we got to keep the cool name. The create web host builder method here, it creates the default builder, which sets up a bunch of sensible standards around cookie ownership and the way that your web server is going to run. You can actually go into the source code of this if you want to learn more about exactly what's configured as part of that. And then we're going to say use startup, right? What's the class that we're going to use to actually configure our web server and pass over, right, how our application will run inside of the web server. And all of that information is inside the startup class, which is sitting right here. So the startup class, I'm not going to get scrolling working here, has a sensible constructor that takes in an I configuration. This is our new configuration object in .NET Core that is more key value based than the old configuration manager that was available in .NET Framework. And we stash a copy of that, and then there's two methods in here that we run. Configure services, and then configure. Now configure services is what's going to configure all the different dependency injection services that you need in your application. So, for example, it's configuring the cookie policy, it's configuring entity framework right here, and it's configuring identity. It's configuring what we need in order to authenticate and authorize users in our application. Last, down here you see it says services add MVC. That's it lighting up and saying this is using all these MVC features, and if they're requested throughout our application, you know how to pass in those MVC capabilities. The compatibility version 2.1 here, this is a new feature that we recently added that tells your application, that your application tells the ASP.NET framework that you want to use the behaviors that were defined with ASP.NET Core 2.1. So as we advance to 2.2, 3, and whatever versions come next, we want to make sure that we're using these compatible features. So if we change the behavior of something, if we change the default behavior, you're going to get what was the default behavior in ASP.NET Core 2.1 because you've specified it here on line 44. Finally, the configure method down here is what configures the request pipeline, right? This is how things will be processed in our application. Every request goes through this pipeline from top to bottom, from line 50 all the way down through line 67. Now, these use statements are executed once, but the behaviors that they're assigning will be executed on every request through the pipeline. And we'll learn more about that when we get a little bit further and we talk about HTTPS. All right. What we want to do next is we want to take a look and talk about the pages element here of the application. So if we look at pages, there's an index page here that is one of these new Razor pages that we have available. So Razor pages, of course, look and feel just like the Razor templates that we had for our views inside of ASP.NET MVC. And if you look at it, I've got some things up here at page. That kind of makes sense. We're declaring that this is a page, a standalone page by itself. At model, I'm used to that. That's defining, this is the model that this page uses. I can understand that. View data, I'm familiar with seeing that as well. And the rest of this looks and feels like standard HTML. And it is. In this page, it is. Now, I'm going to go back and I want to show you, we also have a layout page sitting here. And this layout has, this is where the business really lives for configuring all the HTML goo that goes around that Razor page, right? I've got all my HTML head information, I've got my body, I've got my view data being output right there in my title of this. And if I scroll down a bit, there's my render body on line 45, where whatever was inside that page is going to get injected, right? And if you've worked with ASP.NET Core before, you recognize some of these elements in purple bold text.
Those are tag helpers, and those tag helpers will run server-side, almost like a control in ASP.NET Web Forms. They'll be rendered server-side and injected right there inside of your code. So that's just a little bit about how this puts together, is being put together. Let's run the application, and I want to show you the first new feature that we want to discuss, and that's that HTTPS, Transport Layer Security, is now enabled by default in your application. So it's starting, and we're going to see it build. And there we go. And now, look at this. This project is configured to use SSL to avoid SSL warnings in the browser. You can choose to trust the self-signed certificate that IIS Express has generated. Would you like to trust it? Why, yes, I would. So this is a developer-focused certificate that your machine generated so that it can sign and look and feel like an SSL-based service. This way, you can work with and build your application focused on transport layer security, on SSL features, without actually having to think about, oh, did I remember to include the S or the appropriate formatting in all of my links. You're working with transport layer security with SSL, HTTPS syntax, protocol right from the get-go, so it's all enabled and works. And you can see it looks like kind of the standard template that we've been using with ASP.NET Core for many, many years. So I've got a nice template here, but I've got this thing at the top. This is the first thing that I want you to see. One of the first things that I want you to see now that we've seen HTTPS is in there, and this is the privacy and cookie policy. If you've worked with any of the GDPR, the European, the Data Privacy Act, you know that cookies are a big thing, right? You need to notify people, hey, do I have cookies? Are you going to allow me to save these cookies to your machine? And what's your privacy policy? If you click Learn More, you see it routes to /privacy. And this is a page that you can put your privacy policy on for your application so that everybody knows that you're not using their machine to mine Bitcoin, all right? That you're out there and you're just interacting with them and you're only capturing just those data points that you need in order for your application to work with them. If I click Accept, it goes away and now I get the menu and I can interact with the application. And it looks and feels like a standard template application. So, let's keep wandering around here and build our first Razor page. Now, the first page they want us to build is really simple. Quite literally, we're going to build a page just to report the time, right? Effectively a hello world type of interaction. So I'll right-click on Pages, and I'll choose Add Razor Page. Now, I get 3 templates that I can choose from. Razor Page with Entity Framework, Razor Pages with Entity Framework CRUD. CRUD, of course, is Create, Read, Update, and Delete. So it'll automatically generate all of those interactions with Entity Framework for you. I'm going to choose just the first one here so that we can put together a real simple message that we want to output. So we're going to add a page here, and we will call this, where'd it go? We're going to call this current time. There we go. Now I've got a couple of options here. Generate a page model class, create as a partial view, use a layout page. We are using a layout page. It's the default though, so I don't need to fill that out because it's already filled out for us inside of a view start file. It's a convention that we generate by default in our projects. So I'll call this current time, and it's going to generate this page model class. Now, a page model class, for those of you that have worked with ASP.NET Web Forms, will look and feel like a code behind, right? It'll feel like that code that you had behind your web form on the page. So I get this thing that it's called a page model, but it has a method in it called onGet, right? This method will execute when somebody navigates to the page and they do an HTTP GET, right? They're performing that action where they want to just get the contents from it, right? So it's the same as when they click a link in your browser, as opposed to a post, which happens right when you click a button in a form and the form's been configured to use the post action. So let's just paste some initial content in here for the GET. So I'm going to delete this and I'm going to try the typing tool here and see if we can get that to work. So I'm going to click the little T over here, and it should key in. Nope, it didn't work. It didn't work. All right. There we go. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually type in what's here in the message. The message actually says the current time is, and then system date time now. It sets it to a message property. So let's start off at a property. I'll use a snippet, P-R-O-P, string, message, and down here in the onGet, I will set that message to $quote, the current time is. Now by using the dollar in front of my message, but in front of my string, it allows me to use a feature of C# 6 called string interpolation. So I can actually embed inside these curly braces C# code. So I'll say system datetime.now, semicolon, and now it's put that value into the message property there, and I can output that on the actual page, because this page model, current time model, is the model on this template, on this page. I'm confusing MVC view templates and pages, but they're very much the same thing. So I'm just going to output that content here. I'll put a paragraph marker, and I'll say @model dot, and you can see it's giving me all kinds of information about what's available to me in that model, but I just want to output the message. Let's give it a start. I'll do a Control F5 so that it starts without the debugger. I don't need that. We just want to output this message real quick. So it built. It did a restore. Here comes the IIS. It's going to go to my page. All right, that looks good to start. And I will go to current time. The current time is 8:08 because these machines are configured on Pacific time. No big deal. All right, but we've done it. We've written a simple page that's outputting the current time. And if I refresh, you see the time changes. Simple, right? No problem. Let's start to get a little bit further into this. All right. Let's actually create a model and interact with GitHub so that we can see and work with some information out there when we get to our HTTP client interactions a little bit later on here in the workshop. Is everybody doing good? Everybody keeping up? We're all right? Got a big thumbs up in the back, and my buddies on the side there, they look like they're pretty good too. All right. So let's create a model, right? From MVC, we remember that models are those objects that we're going to interact with and store data in a database. We're going to be able to pull data back, present it on our screen. So let's create a new model class for a GitHub project. So what it wants me to do is right-click on the project and add a new class. Where is it? Add class. We'll call this GitHub project. All right. And we're going to add 3 properties to it: ID, name, and GitHub page. So I will fire those in here real quick. I'll use the prop snippet, int, ID, prop, tab, string, tab, name, okay, tab, enter, there we go. Prop, string, tab, and this is GitHub page, enter. Done. Now I have a little model that I can use to reference and think about GitHub projects. Now, we did that scaffolding earlier to get just a page. Well, let's start creating one using that CRUD template with Entity Framework. So I'll go back and right-click on Pages, And we'll do add add razor page. No, once we do add new scaffolded item. All right, we'll do that one. Razor pages using entity framework CRUD. And we'll click add. Now, this time we get a slightly different dialogue. This time we're prompted, well, what's the model? What are we actually interacting with? I'll pull that down and choose GitHub projects, because we're going to generate, create, read, update, and delete pages for our GitHub projects. And we're going to generate entries for that in our application DB context. So this is our entity framework context that knows how to interact with the database. And it's going to reference script libraries. We'll use the default layout page, and we'll tell it to add. Yes, go ahead and overwrite those index pages. We want to write our brand new Razor pages. So if you watch down here, you'll see it's going to build the application, and then it's going to generate and overwrite that content in my Solution Explorer. Oh man, there's a lot of background noise. I'm sure the folks online are hearing a lot of that. My apologies. It looks like the battery on my other headset went dead. So, and there we go. Now I've got my pages. If I open this up, you can see they're all open across the top. But I've got create, delete, details, edit, index. They're all available for me. But I need to make sure also that that object is available for me in the database, right? We need to create the database and we need to update it with that information. So we're supposed to run the application and get a database error page that we're going to interact with. I want to skip that because I don't want you to get too confused with that. So what I'm going to do is get right into building that database piece. I'll go into NuGet Package Manager and choose the Package Manager console. This gives me a PowerShell window down here at the bottom that I can interact with to start building out the things that I need inside my application. So what I'm going to do to start with here is I'm going to say add migration GitHub project. And what this will do is it'll look at that GitHub project object and set up exactly what I need in order to store that in the database. So, it's actually doing a build. It's going to examine what's there. It's going to look at what's happening with the database. And yeah, good. So we have it. All right, now I should be able to do update database, and it will actually apply SQL scripts to the database, making it look exactly what I need it to look like so that I can store that class inside of, and the data that gets loaded into it inside the database. And we should see a bunch of SQL scripts go flying by here. Right. There we go. If you watch it, you can see create table. So it's also creating everything we need to log into the database. And there it goes. Everything is done, right? I've got this very helpful done message at the bottom. It's cut off here on the screen. But I'm sure on your screens you can see it just says done. All right? Good. My database is up to date. So now we can actually start this and take a look at what this looks like. So start the application. Good, everything's running. Here's Internet Explorer. Oh good, I got some feedback that the recording isn't picking up too much of the background. Fantastic. There you go. So I've got an index page, name, GitHub page, and I can create new GitHub projects in here. So let's, of course, we want to reference ASP.NET Home. that is, of course, the wonderful github.com/ASP.NET/home, right? So I'll create that. Let's add another one in here. I want to add one of my favorite projects that I'm working on. It's a project called CoreWiki. That's a simple ASP.NET Core content management system that I've been writing on my Twitch stream that we use to learn various new features of ASP.NET and other web technologies. That lives at github.com/C#Fritz/CoreWiki. And now it's in my database. Of course, I can click edit. It looks just fine. I'll change this to a lowercase w, save, and of course it updates, right? The details pages look pretty generic. That's fine. And I can delete the projects if I'd like to by clicking delete. So very quickly, for 60-70% of the work that I would need to do to wire all this up, ASP.NET Core and Visual Studio has just generated all the code for me. And that's great, right? That makes me really productive, and I can now come back and hand this over to a designer, and they can make it look good, apply a Bootstrap framework, and make it look nice, position things, in certain ways, and I can start to build business rules as a developer that I want to focus on, and I don't need to spend all of my time worrying about, well, did I line up all my fields properly to save to the database? It just works for you and gets that initial crud off of your plate. All right. So next, let's take a look at some of the new features in ASP.NET Core 2.1. Now, we already saw that HTTPS is baked in, and you had to enable that certificate from the get-go. Now, that's fine, but how are we actually enforcing that? How are we ensuring that folks get a secure interaction? Well, if you go back to the startup page, and I'm going to use, there we go. I'm going to use the control comma hotkey, and I'm going to search for startup. So this jumps me right into the startup, and I can page down here. And you can see inside of configure, we have here on line 61, use HTTPS redirection. So it's going to set up and say, well, I'm already listening on whatever port is configured for HTTPS for Kestrel. And if anybody requests an HTTP connection, right, a non-encrypted connection, I'm going to redirect them and make sure that they get a secure connection. Now, I've been starting this application and going directly to that secure location. I could start the application and go to the HTTP and show you that it does, flip-flop and push you to the other location. You can see exactly what those URLs are that it uses inside of this launch settings JSON file. And you see that it's got some settings here for IIS. When it's running in IIS, application URL is on port 49927. The SSL port is 44332. So if I'm running in IIS like we have been, that's where you're going to find it. So if I navigate it to localhost 49927, it's going to redirect me to 44332. The one down here at the bottom, Ignite 2018, is if we run directly using that Kestrel web server. I can do that by pulling this down and choosing Ignite 2018. And if I launch that one, you'll see it actually launches a command window, and you'll see the information about where exactly it's listening, and it looks like a console application. We'll give it a second here. There it goes. There's my console window. And we'll see right off the top, there we go. Now listening on, hang on. Go back to that. All right, I want you to see this so that you understand what's going on. Right, now listening on localhost 5001, HTTPS localhost 5001, now listening on localhost 5000. It's listening on both ports, Kestrel is. So if I go back to my browser, right, I'm at localhost 5001. If I change this to just, right, localhost 5000, it automatically redirected me. It didn't, I barely saw it. It flashed by and put me right back on the secure one. So you're working secure by default, and you're getting great information coming back that, to your viewers, your visitors, that shows you need to be on the secure version of this. And as a developer, I'm happy because I've got the little lock icon showing up in my browser to indicate, yeah, you're building with Secure Socket. All right. I'm going to change this back to UseIIS Express. Now, GDPR compliance. I already showed you the cookie consent bar across the top that popped up. What you need to know is that cookie consent actually lives inside of, I believe it's inside the shared, there it is, cookie consent partial CSHTML, right? And here's where that use this space to summarize your privacy and cookie use policy lives. We want to use cookies to track you everywhere you go. Okay. So if I run the application, there we go. It's going to the secure site, and I don't have the cookie consent header. Check this out. If I go and open the developer tools here in Edge, they're not opening for me. And I look at, I believe it's in memory. No, I was wrong. There we go. Debugger, and under cookies, and I look at this website. So notice I've got a cookie here, ASP.NET consent, ASP.NET.consent, value is yes. Because you click that accept button on the cookie header, this value got generated. So let's crush that cookie, get rid of that, and refresh the website. And it comes back, we want to use cookies to track you everywhere you go, evil F. So you've got some place that you can go that you can configure this. It just feels easy, simple to lay out and put however you want. You can change whatever content you want in that, of course, but by default, we're enabling you to be compliant with these new privacy standards. We know this is something important for everybody to be concerned about, and we want to make sure that you manage folks' privacy properly. Now, there's another thing here that we now do with our response cookies collection, where we have non-essential and essential cookies. So I'm not going to accept the cookie consent just yet, but I am going to go on to, which page does it want me to put that in? You know what, I'm going to put it on the privacy page. Oh, the irony. So I'm going to go onto the privacy page, and up here with view data, let's write out a new cookie. All right, model, response, cookies, append, all right. Come on, give me some code completion here. Key, value, and one overload. All right, so I'm going to add, yeah, test value is what it wants me to put. Test value, and then I have, no. The last overload, and it's not, is cookie options. And I've got a bunch of features here that I can set on that cookie, but the key one here is essential. So if I say is essential equals false, right? Go ahead and append this cookie, but you don't really need it in order for my application to run. It won't add it while that cookie consent hasn't been accepted, right? So this is important for you if there's something profile or a preference that you want in your application. Make the header blue. Make the font size 16 point, you know? That's non-essential. Right, so I'm going to click Learn More and open the dialog down here. So if I look in the cookies collection, come here, right, there's nothing in the cookies for this page. It hasn't added it, right? Because you've said it's not essential, we don't put it down on the application. But when I click Accept and refresh the page, and I look at those cookies again, I've now got two. I've got the consent and I've got my test value. Because it's non-essential, I've granted it access to write it and it wrote it out. What might be an essential cookie for you is something like session state, right? That user ID that it passes so you know who it is that's logged in. That's an essential cookie, all right? That's essential to the running of your application. So be direct about what you assign as an essential cookie, because at some point you may get challenged, why are you storing this information on my machine, okay? So that's a little bit about that new feature that's available. The next one that we want to talk about is the GDPR features around the right to forget, right? So this is the ability that all websites should have that allow you to say, you know what, not only am I not wanting to use your service anymore, but I don't want you to remember who I am. So I'm going to register as a new user here. And I'll log in with, let's use my email. Sure, Jeff@jeffreyfritz.com. My password is password 1, 2, 3, 4. No, that's not it. That's not a good one. Password. There we go. All right, now we're logged in. If I look at my profile here as a user, first off, we've had two-factor authentication available for you in your project for a while. It comes by default with identity. But now we have this new entry down here, personal data. And you can actually download, this is another GDPR thing, you should be able to see what information is being tracked and logged about you on the website. So if I click download here, and let's open that JSON file. Sure, let's open the Visual Studio Code. There we go. Let's zoom in. All right, so let me just put some carriage returns in here. Okay, so it's a little JSON file and it has all the information about me that this website was storing. There's my email, there's my username, there's a phone number option, but we didn't store anything yet for it, so there's nothing there. We didn't do any email confirmation. Two-factor is not enabled for this account. And then I can tell it, well, you should forget about me by clicking that delete button. All right, VS Code doesn't want to close. Come here. So I could click the delete button and just wipe out that information and no longer be a member of this database, a member of this application. And that's okay. If you decide to extend your user profile object and add new features to it, there are attribute headers that you can put on properties to mark them as personal data so that they get included in this block, okay? So personal data like someone's address, somebody's birth date, you need to mark in the user profile. For those European standards, privacy standards, you should mark those as personal data so that they do get accumulated as part of this feature. We take care of that hookup and plumbing for you. And also, when you click the delete button, because it's marked as personal data, it will be removed from your database automatically by ASP.NET. So, next let's talk about the new identity user interface. Come on, close. Not that one. Not that one. There we go. All right. So previously, when you interacted with identity inside of your application, you had a series of pages that had, or you had an account controller and a manage controller that had a whole bunch of views that went along with it. And if you deleted some of them or you changed them, if you wanted to go back to the defaults that Microsoft issued, you ended up having to do File New Project, see what was generated, copy those files out, and put it into your project. What we've done now is we're using something called a Razor class library. And what this does is it allows you to bundle up a series of Razor pages as a NuGet package that can be installed and referenced as an additional set of features inside of your application. Now, additionally, we've added tooling that allows you to take those Razor pages and copy them directly into your project to scaffold them so that you can customize them easily and override the defaults that are in the NuGet package. So, by default, you get less code to manage inside of your project. We'll pull the defaults from the NuGet package that Razor class library is compiled into, and it should just work, by default. Or you can pull things out and scaffold them, change them as you need to. So let's, what does it want us to do here? It just wants us to show off this feature. So we'll just right click on the Ignite project. I will add new scaffolded item. So down here is identity. So I can choose to scaffold out the identity objects. I'll click add. And then here's where I can say, choose a different layout page for these specifically, or by default, it'll actually use what's in the view start file, which is _layout. And then I have all these files that I can choose to copy out and put down on disk so I can customize them. So all kinds of things about email and your password confirmation, login with two-factor authentication, your account registration and management. Really great stuff. Now, I could generate all those files on disk and specify, well, here's the data context class I want those to interact with, and it'll go and generate those for me on disk. Real easy to do and interact with, okay? I'm not going to actually go through and generate those, but I want you to be aware that it's out there and then easy for you to change up as you see fit. All right. The next feature we want to talk about is HTTP client enhancements. Now, a lot of folks have been using microservice frameworks, right? You want to have a little service here, there, and everywhere, and you want to be able to connect to those HTTP endpoints to request some data, interact with it, and maybe push some back to another service so that it gets updated and deployed throughout your application. So what we've done is we've enhanced the performance of the HTTP client, and we've put together a standard way for you to reference them, generate them, and dispose of them using dependency injection in ASP.NET Core. So what we're going to talk about next is inside that configure services method of startup. We're going to tell it to start generating an HTTP client that we're going to use for connecting to GitHub. So let's do that. I'll go up to the services section here, and let me get make sure everything's all tabified and lined up properly for me. So right up here, let's say services add client, and we'll name this client GitHub. Add HTTP client. Okay? And we'll call this GitHub. And the configuration looks like this. So we'll say the base address that we want this to navigate to is a new URI, HTTPS, and I'm actually going to expand the manual here. There we go. API.github.com. API github.com and slash semi. We're going to add some default request headers. Right, so this is where you might put some things like some authorization tokens. Right, so I'm going to say accept application VND. Let me make sure I get this right. GitHub.v3, right? .github. Hello. .github.v3 plus JSON. Last item, another default header. And we're going to say the user agent. We want to be a good internet citizen and actually tell GitHub this is who I am, so that they can track it later, or they can call me and say, hey Jeff, you're doing something we don't really like here. You know, you're abusing our API. You shouldn't be doing this. So we're telling them that this is just a sample that we're working on. So let's create another new Razor page to demonstrate this feature. So add Razor page. And this time we will call it named client. While that's building, have you had a good Ignite so far? Have you enjoyed the show? Last day, right? Everybody spent way too much time at Harry Potter land last night, am I right? I'm seeing a couple of folks smiling, some others nodding. Didn't have enough fire whiskey last night, did you? No. All right, and I see young lady over here. Yeah. I'm the same way. All right. So here we go. I've got an onGet inside of my named client page model. So let's start adding some features here. Let's create a property that we'll use to output the result of an API call out to GitHub. So we'll call this API result. And we want to stash a copy of the HTTP client factory. So let's put a reference to that as a field here. Good. I'll control dot over here with the little light bulb to generate my using statement. There we go. Now we can start to take advantage of dependency injection because we configured that client so that we can interact with it. So I'll use the ctor snippet to generate a constructor, and I want to receive an HTTP client factory, and I'll just call it HTTP client factory. Store a copy of that so I can reference and use it later. Now, this has been onGet down here. Razor pages, just like all of ASP.NET Core, can run asynchronously. So I can change the signature of this to use async task and rename this to onGet async. And ASP.NET knows how to call that and use it asynchronously so that it'll properly release resources while we're waiting for GitHub to respond to us. So I'm going to say var, and it's suggesting we call this named GitHub client. I'm going to call this just client because I like brevity. HTTP client factory, create client, and I'm actually going to call it GitHub because that's the name of the client that we assigned over here in startup. Right there. So I've got this magic piece of text that says this is the GitHub client and this is what it looks like. So I've created that client and I'm going to say my API result is await, not await dot, await client, get string, async, and I need to tell it where to go. Let me make sure I get the right location. We're going to go to slash orgs, not orgs, orgs.net repos. So I'm going to get information about the .NET organization's repositories, stash it in that API result object. Now, let's actually output that API result on our page here. by just saying @model.API result, and it'll be output right there on my Razor page. Okay, let's give this a shot. I'll Control F5 so it starts without the debugger attached. Building, succeeded. Of course it succeeded. I wrote it. Ship it. Must be good. That's the first unit test. I pressed F5 and it worked. So there's that page. I will go to named client. And there it is. There's all the information about all my .NET repositories. And there's a lot of them. I don't expect you to memorize this, but there will be a quiz later. Totally kidding. So that's cool, right? I made a connection, I made a request out there, and it was easier for me to interact with and get, you know, an HTTP client that's all formatted and ready for me to connect out to GitHub. Now that's nice, but as a developer, I'm not a big fan of this magic text here, right? It's GitHub, and if I don't have that string exactly matching, I'm not going to get my GitHub client. So that's why, as we'll see in this next example, we have what's called a typed client. So we can actually define a class that'll host the client that is strongly typed, and we can use to interact with GitHub instead. So let's add this next class. I'm actually going to start writing it right here in this page, and we'll do a little refactoring to move it out to somewhere else. So we'll create this public class GitHub service. Okay. And we're going to put into it an HTTP client. So I will do a prop HTTP client, and we'll call that client. Let me scoot that up a little bit. It's too low on the screen. Actually, it won't scoot up. So I'm going to Control dot and move this to another file. Fantastic. I'll Control dot to get over there. There it is. So there's my client. And now let's actually create a constructor and that receives an HTTP client that we'll use here. So public GitHub service, and we're going to receive an HTTP client. We'll just call it client. So we're going to set up that same base address, default request headers. So client dot base address equals new URI HTTPS API github.com. Okay. Client dot default request headers add accept, and then we've got that same weird application thing going on there that we had in the startup. Let me go, you know what, I'm just going to grab that code because I can. Good developers copy and paste as much as need be. There we go. So I'll just change this back to client and client. There we go. And now I'll store a copy of that. Let's do this. This.client, so I'm explicit. There we go. Now I need to configure this inside of my startup class so that it can be requested and folks can use it inside of my application, because I do want my other developers on my team to still be productive. So I'll just add here, once again in the configure services method, services.add HTTP client, and now I can use the generic method of this to say GitHub service. And there we go. It's in another folder, that's okay. All right, let's add a page now to actually use this type of client that's specific to that, right, to using this type of client. So right click on pages, add Razor page. I'll choose the first Razor page, that simple template, and we'll call this one typed client. So we'll start this up, save it off. Here it comes. There we go. All right. So I want to set up, just like we did in the previous, instead of receiving a HTTP client factory, I'm going to receive a GitHub service. So I'm going to set up a private field to receive that GitHub service, and we'll call this GH service. And I'm going to create a property for that API result, just like we did previously. Okay. Let me start up a constructor that will receive our GitHub service that's already populated with our client. So public typed client model, and this time I'll receive a GitHub service, GH service. You know what, I'm just going to call this service, so I don't get confused between the two. GH service equals service. So now in my on get, I have, just like I did previously, API result. Oops, I need to make this async again. Async, task, on get async. So API result equals await GH service client. Now I can access the client directly. Get string async, and I believe I'm going to the same location. Repos ASP.NET home issues. All right, we'll go there instead. Repos ASP.NET home. I think it wants the capital on home. All right. Let's give some content in our typed client. So I'll go down to the bottom and just output model, capital M in model, result, API result. There it goes. And we'll start that. Make sure this works. And I think we've got enough time to get into the SignalR demo. All right, so there's my application, and we'll go to typed client, and bazinga, I've got all kinds of information about the issues that are currently in the ASP.NET home repository. Not bad, right? I was able to do this easily, interact with those other locations, and ASP.NET, because I'm using dependency injection to manage the HTTP client, is now managing the life cycle of that. So this way, I don't inadvertently saturate my NIC card, my network card, with all the requests that I'm passing back and forth to other services. That's a pretty cool thing, because nobody wants their web servers to get overutilized because you're requesting things behind the scenes, and it's not you're servicing visitors. So, okay. Let's move on and talk about building real-time ASP.NET Core applications with SignalR. Now, SignalR is our live interaction library, right? If you've used SignalR with ASP.NET, you know that this allows us to actually, from our server, push content down to clients, right? It's not them requesting stuff, but we're doing a push interaction and calling methods on the client for it to interact and do things there. So here's what we're going to do. We're actually going to create this little hub that will get the follower count from, I believe it's from the, from the ASP.NET homepage. And we're going to write that down inside of, inside of a page. So this was set up so that you could see here's how to create it. They didn't actually finish adding the JavaScript for this so that you can actually see it output on the page. let's do this. Looking, thinking out loud. Because, right, there's no more code here for me to go after. Yeah, there's another tutorial over here on the blog. It's kind of lame. But I'm right up against time. So, you know what? I'm going to pass on this tutorial. And I want to make sure that everybody has the information that they need. Right? I want to check in with you guys here in the room. Do you have any questions? I went through that pretty quick. We saw HTTP clients. We saw GDPR. We saw HTTPS. We saw Razor pages. Anybody get stumped? Anybody run into any blockers? Everything worked properly. One guy over here has a problem. What? It's a friend. I'm allowed to pick on him. Go ahead. Use HT... What? Yes. Did you start with an ASP.NET 2.1 project? That would be where I would go, well, okay. Cool. Well, if everybody's good then, I think I'll wrap up the workshop here. Thanks so much for joining me. There'll be a recording of this available on YouTube a little bit later today. We'll publish and make that available for you. All of the documentation will be available as well out on, I believe they're going to publish it to docsmicrosoft.com. If you want to walk through again and get familiar with what it was that we did, how we made and configured those HTTP client calls, and if you want to take a look a little bit further at some of the stuff around HTTPS and GDPR. All right? Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Ignite. Catch you later online. All right? We'll publish that later for you. Thanks so much.